We're going to start the presentation now. Here we go. Let's see if this will work. Please work. Everyone can hear me all right, right? Like the quality is okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Cool, thanks. Okay, presentation interviews at Oxford. This is informal advice and it has not been reviewed by the university. Obviously, this is a continuation sort of the TSA workshops. I hope the people who went to the TSA workshops found them useful. These workshops are free and the overall goal is just to increase access to the process because Oxford interviews are confusing, as is sort of the Oxford admissions process in general. So we're just trying to provide some insight and actually it's just me today. So past workshops is more people, but people are getting really busy. It is our last week here. Actually last 3 days of term. So our terms are super short. We're done with school on Friday. Anyways, if you need formal advice, you should contact your college if there's a truly formal question that needs to be answered. Congratulations to everybody because, and I really do mean that, because the tutors have looked at your applications. And I think a lot of people think the tutors sort of just have a quick glance, but really they are reading, right? They're reading your personal statements. They're looking at your predicted grades. For UK students, they're looking at your grades in the context of your school's overall performance. So let's say your grades aren't so good, but your school isn't so good in its overall grades, that might be taken into account. So everything is taken into account. Your TSA must have gone relatively well. So everyone should have good confidence in sort of their current position, and you should be proud of yourself because you've already beaten the odds. I've just put the numbers for PPE and E&M from last year. You've already beat 16 people for E&M, and for PPE, you've beat about 6.5 people, which is really very impressive. So again, it's a very selective process. So good job for getting this far. Why does Oxford interview candidates? Well, it's because Oxford teaches via tutorials. And tutorials are basically small classes. You sometimes are in the professor's office, you're just sitting on their couch, and you'll discuss a topic one-on-one with them, two-on-one, one-on-one. They're usually 1 to 2 hours long. And they basically are a really it's in addition to the lectures that you may have, right? So you have lectures, but then you have tutorials to follow up on what you learned in the lectures. Most of the time, the tutors will assign something in advance. So for, let's say, logic, it's been problem sheets. For microeconomics, problem sheets. Maybe philosophy and politics would be essays. And these are all discussed at your tutorial. And the tutor is there to talk to you about the subject, to provide clarification, to answer your questions, right? Because obviously you don't get individual attentions at lectures. And I think this really makes Oxford, right? The tutorial system. The interviews are primarily an assessment of your ability to learn and think. And what I mean by that is it's not really an assessment of necessarily your prior knowledge. It's just about how you think about, it's really how you think about what's being presented to you. And after all, the tutors are trying to teach you at tutorials. They're not trying to test you at tutorials. Right. So this year, the interviews, as with last year, the interviews are going to take place online. So as you may know, previously, everybody flew to Oxford, or if you're in the UK, you drove or took a train to Oxford, and everybody got to stay at college for a couple of days, eat in the hall and meet people. And it was a nice experience, I think. But obviously, because of the pandemic and everything, that's not possible. So now it's via Microsoft Teams, which works in your browser. It's really, really important that you have a working camera, a microphone, and stable internet connection. And during the mock interviews, some people didn't have this. And look, it's okay for mock interviews, but I really hope you guys understand that even though the tutors don't officially say hey, we're not going to give you bad marks over a bad internet connection, for example, I hope people understand that simply is a frustration to your interview that you can't avoid, right? So If you don't have good internet at home, maybe go to the library, go to your school, talk to your tutors at school, ask them if they can arrange something for you. You really want to have that working. You want to have the camera working too, because the tutors actually, some of them want to perform a security check. So they want to see if there's anybody else in the room with you. So they don't want to see your blurred background. They want to check if there's any hidden teachers in your room trying to give you advice on the answers. So got to have a camera. Microphone's important. Some people were using AirPods, which the sound quality wasn't great. And, it sometimes like cuts out every other word. You really, I just can't stress this enough. You want to make sure that interviewers can hear you, can see you, and can hear you and see you continuously. Arrive 5 to 10 minutes before interview. I said this at the beginning of this presentation. You just don't want to be that person who's running late. The interviewers are going to be scheduling interviews back to back to back to back. And, if you miss an interview, there are opportunities to reschedule it, but you don't want to be that one person. Certain subjects require different technology. So there's different tiers. E&M and PPE are both considered tier 2. So you need to be able to use the online whiteboard application called Miro. It's free. And you need to have video conferencing from tier 1. So video conferencing is just the camera, the microphone, the internet connection. For tier 3, you have to have one additional thing, which is handwriting capture. So those are for sort of the more complex subjects where they want you to work out equations and actually write things down for the tutors. For the online whiteboard, it's much more simple because they're just asking you to make 1 or 2 marks. So for example, the point of intersection on a graph for your economics interview, or the point of tangency, or the point of inflection, something like that. That's what they would expect you to mark on an economics interview. And that's why they don't need the stylus or the handwriting capture. They just need the online whiteboard. By the way, if you have questions, feel free to press the raise hand feature. I can stop for questions. I think I'm going a little bit too fast anyways. So I scheduled the professor for 1 hour from now. Okay, yeah. So Bill, if you have a question.
Great. Firstly, thank you. Just out of interest, do you know what sort of actions would be required for a PPE interview regarding the whiteboards?
Yeah, so I mean, PPE has the economics component. I don't think you would be expected to see. So for politics, sometimes a question for politics will involve the practice of politics, right? Which is political science, and which is where you might be expected to, let's say, look at a graph of I don't know, a political study that was done, and you might want to point out, let's say, the different features. They might ask you, well, where was the slope the steepest, or at what point did the participation of women fall below the participation of men? And you might want to use your mouse to go ahead and circle that point. I can't stress enough, these are what you're expected to draw is not going to be like, oh, draw this graph of x squared plus 2 minus x cubed, times the logarithm of 10, so we're not going to have crazy sort of stuff like that. It's going to be very basic. It's going to be marking, and it's going to be usually marking on diagrams that have already been drawn by the tutors. And did you have a follow-up question on that, Bill?
Yeah, just wondering, perhaps with economics in particular, because you mentioned intersections and stuff. Yeah, I was wondering whether PPE goes that in depth into economics.
Absolutely, absolutely. But again, we'll go over it later in the slide. Later in the slideshow, the tutors are aware of what you have and haven't studied. So, for example, if you haven't studied calculus, which is technically not a requirement for the PPE course at Oxford, I don't think you should be expected to, let's say, define the integral, or to actually find an integral or something like that, right? But I think the tutors will really walk you through the questions one at a time. So you shouldn't be too nervous about the scope of the interview. I really encourage people not to be worried about the scope of an interview, because not only is it something you can't prepare for, because you can't predict questions from year to year, but also that's not the point of an interview. The interview is not a test. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. So will I have to read anything in advance? Sometimes. And I know that this was supposed to be PPE oriented with a few E&M people participating, but obviously I want to keep it as general as possible. Some interviewees will have pre-reading. So the E&M applicants at Merton, for example, last year, they had to read a case study before their interview. And they had to read the case study, and they were asked about what they thought about the case study. And then they were asked to think further about the case study during their interview. So you definitely want to be prepared for that. And by be prepared, I mean, you want to keep your email inbox open. This is a general good practice in the 21st century. Everybody should have their email sort of ready, right? The college can email you at any time, especially right before your interview. They might be emailing you to say, well, hey, your interviewers are running late. We might have to reschedule, blah, blah, blah. You want to be on top of that. You will hear in advance if pre-reading is required. They're not going to just send you an email 15 minutes before and be like, by the way, read this before your interview. It's going to be pre-announced. You will understand that it's coming. And you'll have a limited amount of time to read it. So I hope everyone has their thinking caps on. It's kind of like the TSA, right? You might want to identify the main conclusion, identify what it's trying to say, identify the premises, identify what the main sort of gist of the article is. I mean, it's reading. I can't teach you how to read. You know, just read the article, make notes, and you know, be prepared and anticipate questions. So the next slide is actually the PPE Admissions Manual, and this is what is given to every single interviewer. And every interviewer is reminded of this over and over again, because this is what is used to assess what an interview should be and what candidates are assessed on, right? So when people ask, well, how are we judged at an interview? Well, you're judged based on this criteria here, because this is the official admissions manual. And we'll go through over this sort of one component at a time. Even though this is PPE, I want people to understand that for E&M, for, I don't know, law, for related subjects, and even unrelated subjects, the criteria isn't far off from this, right? Because interviews, let's say for, I don't know, physics, right? It would also be really the same thing, right? You need to respond to problems, respond to criticisms, present arguments and reasoning in a clear manner, right? So all of these things are generalizable across all the subjects. So I don't want you guys to think, well, this is the PPE admissions manual, I'm doing E&M, it's not applicable to me. It is. Let's go over the part about looking for evidence of genuine interests and enthusiasms. This, I think, is primarily in your personal statement, right? Because before they interview you, they've read your personal statement, and that's where you've sort of attempted, at least, to demonstrate your enthusiasm. Some people say, well, I'm so excited to read the tripartite degree of PPE, and you know, the tutors are there rolling their eyes. And then others are giving specific examples, like I've engaged myself with this program, I've read these books, I've engaged with these online lectures, yada, yada. So that's why it's really important to show that you were serious in your personal statement. During the mock interviews, I remember there was an applicant who wrote that he had read Descartes' Meditations. And my first question right off the bat was, how many meditations were there? And he gave me the wrong answer. And then I asked, well, which meditation was your favorite then out of these 6 meditations? And he said, oh, I really like the classic one. And I said, that's not gonna cut it, right? You gotta know your literature, and especially when your literature is sort of very narrow and very specific and very well known, you gotta know it, right? And some of the best mock interviews I've seen so far are where, when I ask a question about the personal statement, they know exactly what I was going to ask. They have anticipated it, because after all, you wrote your personal statement, and they know like how to respond in a very confident and very enthusiastic way. They've got examples lined up, and those words that's a great way to get an interview off to the best start possible. There have been examples, and actually I think it's a 50-50 type of thing. half the time, a college will not ask applicants anything about their personal statements because sometimes the college is interested in just keeping everything consistent, right? I think out of the 50% of the time that they do ask you about your personal statement, 25% of the time of the 25%, I mean, half of that, so 25% overall, they're not actually trying to assess you. They're just trying to give you an icebreaker question to calm your nerves down, right? So if you don't know your personal statement, you're kind of defeating the purpose, right? They're just trying to give you an opportunity to score a few free points, to get the discussion started, right? To make you comfortable, because what else can you be comfortable with, right? The only thing predictable about an interview would, if anything, be your personal statement. Right. So let's go on to the next part, which is listen effectively. And this is, I think, the most important part that you can take away from the presentation tonight. What does it mean to listen effectively? This means to understand a question before you answer it. And I think this is about not overthinking a question, and it's about properly asking for clarification if you don't understand it. So there was a good example online. I think this was an example from a tutor from Jesus College. If he posed the question, let's say, is death good for us, right? And this could be sort of found in almost any subject, right? It could just be an icebreaker question. Before jumping into that, you want to have heard the question. You want to hear the question, is death good for us? The 5 words. And then you want to see, like, are there any ambiguities about this question, right? Is there any tricks about it? Are there any caveats? Are there any things that need to be defined first, right? So we might want to define death, right? And to define death, we might think, is it the state of not being alive? Is it slowly dying to a painful death? Is it a quick death, a slow death? Do you mean our natural deaths on earth versus, let's say, a spiritual death? Then you might want to talk about what is good, what is not good. What does it mean for us, right? Like, are we assessing sort of how the world benefits, or do we mean the collective individuality that we have? Stuff like that, right? And I know that sounds really like cumbersome, right? But if you jump into these questions without first thinking about what the question is trying to ask, then you're not going to get a very precise answer, and then you're just going to be rambling. And I think the worst answers that I heard during the mock interviews were ones where people just assumed one meaning based on their personal experiences and then jumped into the question straight away. And it just created these off-topic, totally like inaccurate discussions. And I was frustrated. I just kept trying to steer the discussion back on track. I tried to say, like, can we think about the question this way? I didn't want us to think about it this way. So it's good for you to first think about the meaning of the question. Don't overthink questions though. And I had really simple things during my mock interviews for philosophy. I asked people like simple logic questions. I said, you know, either Toto is a cat, or my neighbor hates Toto. And they were just overthinking the question. They said, oh, but what does it really mean to hate a cat, and how can we measure human emotions towards an animal and stuff like that? I said, no, like, let's not overthink everything, right? There is such a thing as overthinking. So when the tutor's asking you, like, what's your name, just tell them your name, right? There's no need to sort of go too deep into the question. Does everybody sort of understand the difference between understanding the question and overthinking? Are there any questions about this? Okay, and I can't stress this enough. You are allowed to ask for clarification. Okay, this is not a written test, right? This is a verbal discussion, a verbal conversation with an expert in your subject. If there's something about the question that you don't understand, maybe it's because of your lack of understanding, maybe it's because the tutor was unclear, maybe because there's ambiguity. Ask for clarification, right? Ask them, like, how would you like me to answer this question? How do you want me to approach it? Am I right to understand that you're asking me X, Y, Z, right? So that's really, really important. Any questions before I move to the next slide? Okay. We want to remember that you should actively listen, right? And at the same time, you're absorbing this information, and you want to assess the relevance. And assessing the relevance ties into critical thinking. And I'm going to answer what critical thinking is, right? We saw critical thinking on the TSA, and obviously you guys have done a good job of it. Critical thinking is related to analysis, to evaluation, to thinking that is clear rather than ambiguous. Open-mindedness, right? You want to be able to take in new ideas and you want to be able to assess those ideas. You don't want to just stick with your first thought. You want to think carefully, right? So you don't want to rush into your thoughts, and you want to assess information. And assessing information, I think, to me means balancing things, right? Balancing different standpoints, balancing different arguments, balancing different viewpoints. That's assessment to me. And the reason why I think we say critical thinking as opposed to just thinking is because we're asking for you to use sort of a higher grade of thinking, if that makes sense, right? We're not asking you to just answer the question. We're asking you to answer a question methodically. We're asking you to answer it systematically. You're being asked to answer it in a way that returns an answer that has been put through multiple checks, if that makes sense. Does anyone have questions about what critical thinking is? Okay. And to that end, this interview, no interviews really. I mean, maybe for some of the sciences, right? Some of the sciences, they're going to ask you like, what is photosynthesis, right? And but for let's say for PPE specifically, I can tell you that it's not primarily meant to be a test of your existing knowledge. If you've studied calculus, you're expected to know what a derivative and what an integral is, perhaps not to find it for every single scenario, but you're asked to have sort of a base level of knowledge so that you can approach these questions without being totally blind to it. And to that extent, I want people to remember that if you don't know the answer to a question, you're probably in an Oxford interview, right? Because some questions at Oxford interviews are designed so that you don't know the answer, right? And it's designed so that your tutor can hold your hand and walk you through the question step by step. Does that make sense? So you want to let the tutor know if you're unsure about an answer, and that's perfectly fine. You can tell the tutor, hey, I've never seen this before. But it's not okay to tell the tutor, hey, I don't know. I don't know this answer. Can we choose a different question? Or during one of our mock interviews, I remember this person, I asked a question and she's like, oh my God, like, are we really meant to answer questions like these? I was just like, yes, if you don't know the answer, you gotta at least try. Tell the tutor what you do know, what you think the answer might be, and how you got to that reasoning. And then the tutor will help you by suggesting new information, by saying, oh, well, do you know this? And if you do know that, can you then get to the answer, and so on and so forth. Okay. So on that note, it's really important not to be silent, because the tutors can't read your mind yet, and they can't help you reach the right answers or engage in a constructive discussion if you're not telling them what you're thinking. So you can use phrases like, well, I'm thinking this, but now I realize it's not right, so that they know you're at least thinking, and then you're criticizing yourself and you're stopping yourself when you need to. I need to rethink my answer because of this. I understand blah and blah, right? So if someone asks you like, what is photosynthesis? And you don't know, you can be like, well, I know photo means light. I know synthesis means creation, but I'm having a hard time remembering what the actual definition of that word is, right? And then the tutors can help you bring it together. Or you can say, well, I'm a little bit confused by X and Y, and maybe can you help me clarify this and that, right? So it's really important to talk to your tutors. If you're letting the whole thing be like a job interview where it's sort of just your employer asking you questions and you answering them, that's not going to be fun. It's going to be intimidating, and you're not going to get sort of the satisfaction of answering these questions that you once thought to be impossible. I remember during my economics interview, oh my God, I mean, the question, I was panicking like crazy. I saw the question, the tutors took like 4 or 5 minutes just to explain the question, to set up the problem. And I was just like, how are we ever going to approach this, right? But when we just handled it step by step, and when we talked about the discussion together, we talked about sort of what I understood, what I didn't understand. And once everything was clarified, I was like, wow, this is actually awfully manageable. But if you let yourself shut down, if you let yourself be silent, you're never going to get the right answer. Any questions before we move on?
Hi, I did have one question.
Sure.
So I'm coming from the US, obviously my accent, and I'm doing AP exams. So
Yeah.
one of the exams I'm taking is actually being self-studied. It's not offered at my school. Would I be able to clarify that I haven't gone very far because I'm self-studying, or would it kind of be expected that I already have a good grasp of the curriculum?
So if you've put that on your UCAS application, it is something that's already stated. I really would not worry too much about that. Do you have a specific subject you had in mind that you were talking about?
Yeah, I'm taking AP Comparative Government on my own. So like I've already started learning it on my own, but I don't know, the whole breadth of it.
I think especially for politics, that's not a major concern. So I really would not panic at all about that. Politics can be a lot of different questions, but it's hardly subject specific. I mean, not event specific. They're not going to ask you, well, in what year was the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Or they're not going to ask you, what are the benefits of socialism versus I don't know, capitalism, right? Like that's just way too specific. The questions are more like, can you tell me about how you would define democracy, right? And then how what you think a good democracy is and what a bad democracy is, and then maybe go on from there. Or how can we prevent election fraud? Or what do you think the influence of money is in elections, or things like that, right? It's again, the test is not of knowledge, the test is of thinking. And if they give you a question that's way too hard off the bat, how can you express your ability to think critically and think analytically, right? So just remember, it's not about content, it's really about how you approach a question. Okay, Leona?
Thank you.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. So I'm in a similar situation. I'm from Canada. I also took the AP Calculus B6 exam, but I'm also self-studying.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, will they be questioning me on integral, which I have no idea about?
Like I said, I highly doubt it. Before this, I took a collection of sort of questions from all sorts of applicants. I think E&Mers, because calculus is required, they should expect way more depth to calculus if it's presented. From all the PPEs I've heard from, the most difficult question probably of all was, what is an integral, right? And the integral was defined as the area created by a function, right? The area under a function. So again, you should not think like, oh, I actually need to do specific maths. It's more conceptual, and it's about how you apply the concept to a question. Oftentimes it's a specific problem. So for example, I don't know, it's the rate of productivity, right? And they'll explain what that means to you. And then you have to understand, based on what they're discussing with you, that the rate of productivity happens to be the slope. And then they might ask you, how do you find the slope of a curve? And then you say, well, that's the derivative. So simple stuff like that. It's really not going to be, here is a calculus question. You have 5 minutes to tell me what the integral of this function is. That's not what an interview is. I'll take a question from Susie, and then we'll move on, and we can take a question after the next slide.
Okay, I just kind of had one question about if there's any, like, I know it's probably quite hard to put a measurement on, but if there's any maybe a sign that you're like relying on the interviewers too much when they ask you a question. And you're maybe like,
I'm going to talk about that in a later slide. Because everybody should keep that in mind. There is a balance, and I got to be honest, like in my interviews, there was one of the interviews where it was laughing and we were just like talking, and it was like buddies chatting, right? And there was another one where it was just like question after question, and they had, I think, 20 to 30 questions to ask, and they just wanted to hear you answer each question, and each question was related to the last, right? So it was just question after follow-up question after follow-up question. So each each one is going to be different. And I want people to not be nervous about creating the perfect interview. You won't be able to create that. And you'll only realize that you had a good interview sort of in hindsight in January, once you've gotten your results. It's not possible to assess based on the climate, if you will, of your interview, whether or not you did well. So I don't want anyone to overthink that. Okay. Anyways, just moving on, all candidates should be ready to respond to problems and criticisms put to them. And this was very interesting during the mock interviews, because some people struggled a lot with this, whereas some people it just came really naturally. What does this mean? This means it's okay to be wrong. And this means also keeping in mind that in an interview, you might be taught something new. So I learned something new in, I think, 2 out of 3 of my interviews. And I walked away from it being like, oh, wow, I actually never thought about that in this way, right? And it was an interesting experience. So if an interviewer is telling you new information, you need to first assess the information. Remember that part about assessment that I talked about? So by assessing it, it means you need to figure out, like, is the tutor trying to correct you, right? Are you saying something that doesn't make sense and the tutor is trying to correct you? Or perhaps the tutor likes your argument, right? But the tutor feels like your argument is not robust enough, is not sort of strong enough. So maybe the tutor is trying to help you make your argument stronger, right? So they're asking, hey, have you considered this? And then it's up to you to say, oh no, I actually, thank you for your point. I'm actually thinking about it. It fits in this way into my original argument, but it's actually not compatible. So I reject this new information. And if you don't know the tutor's trying to correct you, or if they're presenting you a counter argument, it's important for you to ask for clarification, because you don't want to just assume everything is a correction. If you assume everything's a correction, then that shows you can't think critically, right? And that also shows that you can't hold your ground when presented new information. So a tutor might really like what you're trying to say, and a tutor could disagree with you. Let's say you say, oh, I don't know, lockdowns are good for pandemic relief, right? And a tutor might say, well, have you considered the dimension of individual liberty? They don't expect you to roll over and say, oh yeah, actually, now that you've said that, I think individuals are the most important. It's up to you to say, well, I'm presenting my argument because I believe in the utilitarian perspective, because I think that we should think about the common good before we think about the individuals. And then you can have a discussion, right? So there's no right answer. I told you, it's all about the discussion. It's all about a back and forth. So this is why I think sometimes people who have been in debate society find this, or Model UN, they find this simpler because they're used to arguing. But don't be afraid to argue back with your tutor, especially if they're presenting you a counter argument and they're presenting you a different point of view. Allow it to happen. Allow it to change your perspectives. Keep an open mind. Okay, right. We need to present arguments and reasoning in a clear and carefully articulated manner. And oh my God, I mean, during the mock interviews, there were some candidates where I ask a very precise question, deliberately so. I ask a precise question because I was just trying to get a very precise answer. And they start rambling and ranting, and then they go on about all sorts of things. And I just got to remind you guys, your interviews, you guys probably got the schedules already. They're going to be maybe 15, 20 minutes long, right? And it's not going to be this sort of long thing where you can talk your ear off, and I mean, talk their ears off and just go on and on about your favorite subject. Outline twice, write once. And I mean that metaphorically, and actually kind of physically too, literally, because remember, you're allowed to use paper, right? So for all my interviews, I always had a pen and paper ready. I always wrote down exactly what I meant. And I wrote it down on the paper because when the tutor said something new to me, I'm a visual person. So I can look at what I've written down and I think, oh, well, that relates to this, and I can jot down notes. I think it's important to give an answer and to change it, but not to be stepping over your own words. Do you guys get the difference, right? So there's a difference between speaking too quickly and saying, oh no, actually I meant this. Oh no, I meant this. Oh no, I meant this. And also just kind of thinking about your answer first, and then later, once you've sort of properly thought about your argument fully, providing a correction or providing a follow-up to that. There's a difference between being haphazard about it and being calculated about it. Allow the interviewers to guide the discussion. And I mean this because I genuinely thought during some of the mock interviews, a very small handful of people, they were trying to steer the discussion in a whole different way. And if you're doing that and the tutor, tutors have a pre-written set of questions, right? They know what they want to ask you. So if you're trying to steer the discussion off topic, the tutors will try to bring you back on topic. So be mindful when that's happening. We're almost to the end of this presentation, and yeah, we're running ahead of schedule, surprisingly. So we'll have time for a few questions and discussion. The mock interviews, the good ones, shows up on time, ready to jump into the first question, clearly enthusiastic. They're very familiar with their personal statement. They listen to the questions being asked, and their first response is not a response to the question, but it's to clarify any ambiguities if the ambiguities exist. Because again, they're keeping in mind that you can't approach a question accurately without properly knowing what the question is trying to ask, right? To that end, we need to make sure that arguments are concise enough, right? So don't ramble. You want to stay on topic by allowing the tutor to steer the discussion. They openly talk through their mental thought processes. And I saw this a lot, which was really from the strongest candidates. They tended to think out loud. And I know that's hard for some people if you're not used to it, but it's really important to say, say things like, oh, my first instinct is X, but I'm also thinking Y. And I'm trying to, really talk it through. I think highest level candidates used relevant and interesting examples to illustrate their points. And that's why I said it's really important to read up. And a lot of you, I sent you suggested homework, which was reading the news. Reading the news is great because it provides you context to a lot of these questions. Because oftentimes, let's say for politics, the questions are going to be related to current events. They might ask you like, what is the best way to handle refugees, right? Or something like that. And if you have like strong background knowledge with current events, you'll be able to express yourself in a more sort of complex way, right? Than just using generalities and using general points. The good applicants definitely asked for clarification when needed. They weren't afraid to say, well, I'm not sure. And they just asked for clarification. They said, do you mean this? Am I right to understand this? And they kept the discussion conversational. I think the worst ones were where I definitely felt like I was in an interview and I was very stressed out as an interviewer, right? I was just thinking, man, it's just about one question after the next. But there were some candidates that were so conversational that I was excited to ask the next question because I was really interested in what they had to say next. Be focused, be confident, and don't be afraid to accept corrections. It's fine to be wrong, and it's fine to get new information. And they do not shy away from difficult questions. They approach difficult questions with enthusiasm. So when they see a difficult question, they smile. They're like, "Oh, great! Like let's jump into this." They're passionate about it. Let's take a question from Dom.
I was just wondering, when you're kind of trying to use relevant examples and interesting arguments, how do you do that in a way which is kind of stays on topic, like you said, and isn't something where you're just trying to show off your kind of pre-existing knowledge and things like that? Sorry, I know it might be an impossible question to ask, but is there a fine line there, if that makes sense?
So I think what you're trying to ask is, how do you know if a relevant example is relevant?
Yeah, it's also, I've also kind of read, and I could be wrong here, that sometimes applicants are kind of, they want to get into the interview and show their pre-knowledge, but do it at the expense of like not answering the question, if that makes sense. So give me 1 second. I need to reach under my desk and plug in my computer. Yeah, weird.
There was one applicant where I remember it was it was not good because I asked the question and then they just went on about sort of narrowly related literature, but they were clearly trying to show off. I don't think this is necessarily the best opportunity for that. And I want you to take that with a grain of salt, because that's my personal opinion about it. I think a lot of tutors are more interested about your critical thinking ability than your pre-knowledge of the subject. Because surely somebody who's, let's say, taken philosophy class at school before versus someone who hasn't, most Americans have never taken philosophy at school. How would that be fair if more credit was given to those who have sort of pre-existing knowledge of a subject versus somebody who doesn't? And if the PPE interviews are to keep true to the spirit of not being a subject test, then surely not too much credence can be given to those people who are able to come up with examples. So I think my point is, use your best judgment. I think use it when it makes sense. If you're already feeling like, you know what, I'm starting to name drop, I'm starting to make examples that don't 100% make sense, that's probably a hint to yourself that that's not a great example. Got a question from,
thank you.
Yeah, no worries. We got a question from Tao.
Yeah, hello. I just want to ask, firstly, do you have any recommendations for the dress code? For example, like what should I wear when I'm doing an exam? Interview. And secondly, I'm very used to looking at somewhere else, usually something totally irrelevant while I'm talking. Is there a problem in an interview? Thank you.
Can you guys hear him, or is that just me? I think you're muted, Tao.
Oh, yeah. So I was just asking firstly about dress code. Secondly, is there a problem if I'm used to looking at somewhere else when I'm talking instead of looking at the camera?
No, I don't think that's a problem. I did see that with some candidates. They didn't like looking directly at the camera, and that's weird to stare in the camera. I wouldn't do that if I were you. It's okay to kind of put it's going to be on your screen, right? The picture of the interviewers are going to be on your screen. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's an online interview, so just a Zoom dress code where pants are optional. It's Zoom, right? And I really want to stress that I hardly notice people's clothing. And thinking back, I don't remember anyone wearing memorable clothes, right? Or one person standing out more than the other. The tutors always say, wear something you're comfortable in, and that's it. So don't go on putting on a suit if you normally wouldn't wear a suit. If you want to, go ahead, if that's what makes you comfortable. But I just want people not to stress out over a very trivial thing. You should be more concerned about what you say. And believe me, with the number of people that the tutors see, they make notes in their notebook because they need to refer back to it later. And they're not necessarily like remembering who you were. The best thing is to be memorable about what you say and not memorable about what you wear. Okay, we'll take one more question from Diana, and then we'll have more opportunities. This is the fourth to last slide. I'm almost done. So Diana, just real quick.
Yeah, thank you. What I wanted to ask was how informal is too informal, because I've had a grand total of 2 mock interviews so far, and I've sort of noticed myself starting to get more and more conversational, which might be a good thing, but to some extent I feel like I'm being too informal, and that might reflect badly on my interview performance, because I don't necessarily want to go in there and be perceived as, too arrogant and all that stuff.
Look, I think you should use your best judgment. And I think being conversational is very important. I wouldn't go around calling your interviewers like bro or dude, but I think it's really important to read the room, right? Because a lot of the times, one of the people doing the interviews, that actually might be a good question for Professor Thornton about what is too informal and what type of formality is expected. I really think you should just read the room. Sometimes the academics are very young. They greet you by saying, "Hey, what's up?" I remember that was one set of my interviewers. Both of them were sort of in their 30s. They're like, "Hey, what's up, man? Like, how's it going?" And you know, they're super casual about it. So just read the room. You know, if your tutor is sort of in a button-up jacket, you know, this guy who's clearly been in Oxford for 50 years, maybe just tone it down a little bit. But again, just use your best judgment. The bad ones, and oh boy, there were some bad ones. Don't be late for your interview. You got to have a really good reason to be late to your interview, right? There's no reason to do that. Set an alarm on your phone, put it in your calendar, put it on a post-it note. You know, you're going to have interviews back to back, and you might be called to a second interview. So in some subjects, you start by doing a second interview. So some subjects you interview at 2 colleges just to begin with. That's considered first round, right? But then PPE and E&M, you might get called for a second or even a third interview at other colleges. And typically speaking, that's what happens when you've been marginally rejected. If you weren't able to get a place, but you were just short of the cutoff, maybe you didn't perform well at your interview. They want to give you another chance. So they will reallocate you to a different college for another chance. You need to stay on top of your schedule, because I have heard of cases where when people miss their interviews, especially their second interviews, they were just like, you know what, forget it. Like, we don't have time. So you do not want to be that person. Avoidable technical difficulties, I talked about that at the beginning. Guys, I know that internet access is sort of inequitable in this country, in UK and around the world, but just seek it out. Go to your friend's house, go to the school library, go to your school, use someone's phone hotspot, something like that, right? You got to make sure people can hear you. And do a test call. Use Microsoft Teams to call buddy and ask them, hey, can you hear my microphone all right? You know, are my AirPods good? Is this microphone I'm using good? You know, this is just respect for the tutor's time and respect for your interview. You know, this is your Oxford admissions interview. The worst candidates just rush into answers really quickly without first understanding the question. I remember I asked a question, and then the second question I asked was I asking you a trick question? And then some people just gave me immediately a yes or no question. And then I had to prompt them afterwards. I said, what do you think I meant by a trick question, right? And I had to prompt them to think about the question further. So don't rush into your answers. It's okay to give an answer to get a discussion rolling, but don't be so confident in a yes or no, A or B answer. Usually the questions aren't that simple. There were some people who made it really awkward because they kept giving short 1-sentence answers to questions, even though like I was trying to ask narrative questions. So generally, if people ask you like, how do you think we should design an election? You shouldn't be giving a 1-sentence answer. So be careful that your answers are not too short. Don't expect the tutor to do most of the interview and talking. So the tutor wants to hear you speak, let them speak, but also make sure that you're the one giving adequate answers. Some people said, I don't know, like I mentioned, never say that. You know, be more sort of crafty in the way that you say, I don't know, right? Be like, you know, I think I've heard of this before, but I'm having a hard time coming up with the right answer, something like that, right? Does not accept corrections and feedback. Oh boy, there was somebody who I provided a definition of a particular concept in philosophy. And I said, can you repeat it back to me? And they kind of like modified the definition and then repeated it back to me. And then I told them, I said, no, that's not right. Let me just tell you the definition one more time. And then when I repeated the definition, this person was like, didn't I just say that? Ugh. And I was like, please just don't do that, right? Like, except when the tutors are telling you that you're wrong and they explicitly say like, this is not correct, just accept that is not correct, right? That's not them trying to catch you out on whether or not you actually are or not correct. Like, don't argue. That's not the hill you want to die on. And also frantically stepping over their own words. This was more to do with anxiety than anything else. I think some people were just speaking so fast. They were speaking, you know, I talk quite quickly, right? But I don't feel like I'm stepping over my own words. Some people were speaking so quickly that their brain had not caught up with their mouth, and you don't want that. So just slow it down a little bit, think before you speak. Second to last slide. This is just a recap. Listen to the tutors, understand the question, ask for clarification, think before speaking, to vocalize what's in your head and vocalize what difficulties the tutors can help you understand. Show your genuine enthusiasm. That's making sure that you show that you're engaged with the subject, that you're not being made to do the interview at gunpoint, right? You want to show them that you're happy to do the interview, that these questions are interesting to you. That's showing genuine enthusiasm. And you want to demonstrate your ability to think critically, and this is important, these last two words, with depth, right? With depth. One of the philosophy interview questions during my mock interviews was, I held this marker up to the screen and I said, how many things am I holding up, right? And to think critically is probably to first think about what a thing is. But then the people who thought with depth, they immediately started contrasting. They said, well, I know this is what thing means, but then here's what I also think object means, and what instrument means, and what utensil means. And it came up with a bunch of very interesting sort of concepts. And you could clearly see that they had mental organization and depth in their thinking. And oftentimes this can simply be achieved by writing down your thoughts on paper. A lot of people try to mentally organize this and it just doesn't go very far because it's a lot to think about. So again, use paper if you need to. Accept corrections and feedback, and consider new information and counter arguments. And oh yeah, sorry, this is the last slide. Okay. If I interview poorly, will I be rejected? And I'm only putting this slide in because I don't want you to, not because I want you to think about your admissions chances during the interview. That will psych you out. And I know like this is already going to be a very sort of nerve-wracking experience. You don't want to make that worse by thinking, oh shit, like I ruined it, haven't I? Right? Like don't think like that. And I think a lot of you guys will say you walked out of the TSA thinking, oh no, forget it. Like I'm calling Durham, I'm calling Warwick, like that's not the right way to think about it. You've gotta have confidence, not false confidence, but you gotta remember you've already been selected to this stage. The tutors already think you're not that stupid. So you gotta have confidence in yourself. And you gotta remember the interview is one component, and I can't stress that enough. Someone did want to ask like how it's weighted. We will ask the professor that, but please remember that like you are assessed holistically, right? Just like if you do poorly on your TSA, it's not a guarantee that you're going to be rejected. If you do poorly in your interview, it's not a guarantee that you'll be rejected. So don't think like that, right? Focus on doing your best. It's online this year, you can't meet the other applicants, so there's no way you can size people up or try to play mind games with them. So just focus on doing your best. It's an individual effort, okay? Okay, we have like maybe 5 minutes before we're expecting the professor. Can we take a few quick questions? Bill, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, in terms of the mock interviews you gave, how does that contrast relative to the difficulty of the actual interviews we would receive?
Well, I gave an interview question that was an actual previous interview question at Oxford. So everything I asked in my mock interview was nearly word for word based on my written notes, what was asked at a previous interview. So,
gotcha.
So that was the exact difficulty. Yeah, that was your question. Yeah.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Emma?
You mentioned before that in the E&M interviews, we might get asked to do integration. Do you know what kind of level that will be? Because I know that we've literally only just started year 13 integration in school. So if it's like basically a 12 stuff, it'd be fine. But should I like go away and learn all of integration?
No, I can't. I'm not the best person to answer that. I would refer you to my colleagues who you're already in contact with. Feel free to email them. I know that they're not that busy where they can't answer an email. Just ask them about that. Like I said, E&M, the level of mathematics is a little bit higher, but they do know that you are currently studying calculus, right? And you're expected to know calculus for next year, not now. To be honest, like in first year of microeconomics, people are still learning calculus, right? So E&M students and PPE, they both take microeconomics in the first year, first term. and everybody is still sort of catching up on their calculus. So don't overthink that. Okay, David.
Yeah, I was just wondering what would be like an example of one of the more difficult questions you might get in economics for PPE applicants.
So just to stick with the spirit of the fact that these interviews are not a test of knowledge, I don't really want to answer that question because if a question is more difficult, it means that the tutors didn't expect you to know how to answer it, and they're going to walk you through it. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, I got a question with all sorts of crazy new concepts, and there was teaching during the interview. They taught me new things during the interview to how to solve that question, right? So that was a test of how I could listen carefully, how I could assess the new information, and how I could learn quickly, right? So that was the main assessment.
Would they be looking to like gauge your critical thinking, or more so your like numerical reasoning in the economics? Like would they give you some like kind of, I know, like, have you ever heard of the 2/3 problem?
No. Well, maybe I have.
Well,
I don't know.
Would they like ask them like a problem that puts you on the spot and that requires like some kind of numerical reasoning to do, or would it just be more like dealing with concepts and like thinking about something critically?
Again, you can't predict. There is an infinite number of possible interview questions. You can't predict everything, and I'm just telling you there are no boundaries as to what they can and cannot ask you, right? So all we can stick with, all we do know for sure, is the content of your personal statement and the spirit of the interview, which is defined as not a knowledge test. That's all I can say.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, Andreas. And
yeah.
we're almost expecting the professor, so please. Yeah.
Yeah, earlier we spoke about writing things down in your interview and making sure you had your sort of main concepts on the page. How do you go around that so that it still feels like a conversation?
So I mean, sometimes let's say for economics, they spent like 4 or 5 minutes just talking about what the problem was going to be, right? They set up a scenario. They said, oh, like we're setting up a scenario, here's the equation, this is what we're going to understand this to be, blah blah blah, right? So I was showing my concentration by having my head down writing, right? And during, I mean, they know what you're doing if you're putting your head down, right? If you're putting your head down and you're scribbling, they know what you're doing. So I used the paper to sort of diagram a little bit. I drew circles, I drew lines, I drew sort of like marks, so I have my own note-taking system. I think notes work for some people, and if it works for you, that's what you should focus on doing. It's like the TSA. Nikash, you should.
Thank you. My question is about the kind of bringing in relevant examples. Do you only go into so much depth as to illustrate your point and then get straight back into the question, or can you go into a bit of depth about what your example really shows and then bring it back to the question?
I think you should read the room and use your example insofar as it helps you illustrate your point. If you're going in depth for the purposes of showing off, that might not be the most welcome thing, especially if you're running towards the end of your interview. I think what you will realize is that the interviews cut off at the time mark, right? Like when time is up, because the next interviewee is waiting. They're not going to sort of hold up the whole entire thing for you and you alone. So anyways, I think that's just something to keep in mind. Jess?
Hi, I'm not actually applying to Oxford, I'm applying to Cambridge, but I think this is still relevant. Yeah. Is there any sort of structure that you find is particularly effective to just stop you from rambling, particularly if it's like a very complicated question that has a lot of ambiguity?
I think just following on what I said earlier, if a question the questions aren't designed for rambling, if that makes sense, right? Like no tutor will deliberately ask a question because they're like, I want this candidate to ramble. If you've understood the question correctly, and if you've already constrained the question, right, by asking clarification, I think you will get to a really specific sort of really focused answer. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is make sure that you establish the boundaries of the question. If you feel like the question is too general and you feel like you're about to ramble, then ask them, like, are you specific? Like, for example, if they say, I don't know, what is something that's good, right? Then you might want to immediately say, oh, do you mean like something good in theory, something good in practice? Like, can you clarify the question a little bit more? Something like that, right? You really want to establish your own boundaries. And if you feel like you're ranting, you might just say like, oh, you know, sorry, I feel like I'm talking too much, or something like that, right? Just again, keep it conversational. Yeah, sorry for the delay. I don't know where the professor is. I'm gonna shoot her a quick email. Can we get Tyler Ray, please?
Hello, I just wanted to ask about logic questions in philosophy.
Yeah.
So before you said don't overthink questions. So with logic, for example, would you just tell them like almost the mathematical process of your logic and then explain like other ways? Or do you think we should just go with the simple route for logic? If that makes sense.
Give me 1 second. So sorry. Okay. Yeah. So sorry about that. I apologize. I was responding to an urgent email. Can you just ask the logic question one more time?
Oh yeah. So I just wanted to ask about if the tutors are just looking for like how you'd answer it or like logically, or would they in a philosophy interview be wondering if you could answer it a bit more philosophically? Like, would you go deeper into some of the logic, if that makes sense?
Logic is generally not meant to go onto a philosophical level, generally speaking, like very generally. But you know, in my mock interview, I did ones that were very straightforward, and then at the end, I did one that was sort of more philosophical, right? I did one about identity that was a little bit philosophical in nature. So there is a, you know, you should expect a good mix of both. But what you just expressed was sort of a lack of clarity about how they want you to approach the question. So that's exactly what you would ask the interviewer. You'd say, hey, you know, I can approach this from sort of a pure mathematical A and B, B and C type of perspective. Or did you want me to discuss sort of the philosophical, like, did you want me to think the questions through? Like, what do you want me to do? And asking that one question would save you from going down the wrong track the whole time, right?
Yeah. Thank you. That's very useful.
Yeah, of course. No worries. Any other questions? Sorry, I was responding to the email because I realized that the link I had sent to the professor was an outdated link. So I just resent it to her. Should be any second, but yeah, sorry about that. Lewis, have a question?
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, obviously there's only a couple days until the interviews, but what would you say are the most effective ways to prepare? Would you say like going over the personal statement or obviously refreshing like critical thinking skills and things like that?
I'd say it's going over your personal statement and not in sort of an obsessive way. If anything, it's in a way that ensures you are actually familiar with what you said you've read. Because if you get an interviewer, if you write about utilitarianism and you said, oh, people, you know, we did the personal statement review sort of right before this in our workshops, and people made like the boldest claims, and I felt like it was a little bit exaggerated and teetering on hyperbole. They said, oh, I was inspired by the words of Rousseau and it inspired me to change my whole way of thinking and blah, 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 right? And surely if that were the case, you'd be intimately familiar with the literature, right? So just be careful about your claims. And if anybody's made a bold claim, now's the time to actually read the books you said you read. There's no other way to prepare for interviews. You can do 100 mock interviews and it still be the same. It's like the TSA. I told you guys, if you can do 100 TSA practice papers if you wish. However, it's more about learning the structure, right? Than the actual content itself.
Yeah, okay.
Leona?
Oh, yeah. So my view on a specific issue has changed since I wrote my personal statement back in September, and I mentioned it in my personal statement. So in my interview, when the tutor, for example, asked me my view on this issue, can I be like, oh, this was my view when I wrote this in September, but now my view has changed to this. Is that okay?
Of course, I don't see why not, and that actually is, if anything, is a demonstration of how you know, you're sort of willing to change your mind, right? You know.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Jess, did you have a question? Another question?
No, sorry. I think my hand was just up from before.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, sorry guys. Yeah, it's quite silly of me. I sent an outdated link, and I don't know if Tia's got it. Does anyone else have any feedback? Emma,
it's quite similar to the last question, but I've like done some extra research on some things on my personal statement, like just in case they ask me something similar. And I think one of the arguments I put forward isn't wrong, but like I would have a stronger argument now. So I've completely changed my mind because I've done the more research. So it's not like my moral opinions have changed. It's like I've had new information and changed my mind. Is it okay to admit that I think what's in my personal statement isn't as strong as my opinion now?
Yeah, I don't see that to be a problem. And I think if again, the personal statement is meant to be a freebie, right? It's meant to be like, you wrote this document, why don't you just tell us about why you're so passionate, the same passion that you were trying to express in your personal statement. So I think yeah, I can't possibly see an issue with changing your views between a couple months ago and now, especially with everything going on. Yeah, Kayla, did you have a question?
Yes. So with regards to written work, I applied for history and politics, so I had to send that. What role does that play in the overall admissions process, or even the interview?
That's a good question. I'm pretty sure it's reviewed before interview, and sort of notes about it might be referenced by your tutors during the interview, but I can't say 100% because PPE and E&M don't require written work. Yeah, but I think the reason why they ask you to send it in before the interviews is because they want to review it pre-interview.
Okay, so just look at it the way I would look at my personal statement.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you should be familiar with your personal work. It's your work. Yeah. Nathan?
Yeah, hi. I'm curious if the mock interviews are still going on. Otherwise, is it possible for me to access maybe a past database of E&M interview questions? I'm sorry, I might have missed it. Yeah.
Are you E&M?
Yeah.
Right. So I've been doing the philosophy interviews lately because the economics interviews truly take a very long time. And I was only able to get done with, I mean, I spent a good, I think 10, 11 hours doing mock interviews for philosophy. I haven't done any econ ones because econ, there are so many different questions for econ, right? Econ can be probability, it can be game theory, it can be questions about the state of the economy, it can be, you know, companies, it can be micro or macro, right? It can be a lot of things, as is the case with every other subject. So I just can't stress enough that what I was trying to help people with during the mock interviews for philosophy was trying to get people in the mindset of thinking about questions thoroughly and getting them comfortable with speaking to another person on the screen. Adam?
Hi. I think you mentioned last workshop that you were rejected first time round because of your interview.
Yeah, right.
What was it you did differently the second time round for you to be successful?
To be honest, I don't think I made sort of major changes, at least not consciously. I definitely tried to slow it down. I'm a personal believer that there is just dumb luck from year to year. people are marked. You get an interview score sort of from what, like 50 to 100, right? The British marking system. And then they put those scores in the system, they hash it in with your TSA results and things like that. And it comes out with a composite score, and then that's your score that's used to further evaluate your application. Sometimes from year to year, there's variance. I felt like I just got a really hard interview question. I panicked a little bit. In my interview feedback from the year I was rejected, the previous year, they said I didn't go into enough detail, that when the professors were pressing me, I definitely kind of clammed up, right, instead of continuing to talk. I don't remember much more than that. But oh yeah, I also forgot what a derivative was, which is funny. There was a question on it was in politics, actually. The politics and the economics interview were combined into one. No, actually, it was an economics interview, and it was with a political dimension, because they were talking about a graph about cycling lane usage in London, I think. And then they asked me, they said, oh, so what should you look at to determine the rate of usage or something? And I said, oh, it's the slope. And they're like, what is the slope? What's that called? I'm like, rise over run, of course. And I remember they kept pressing me on it. And it wasn't until I walked out of that interview that I was like, wait a second, did I say derivative? And I just felt like an idiot afterwards. Who knows if that blew my interview? I mean, you never know for sure on these types of things. But like I said, if you're overthinking sort of whether or not you did well or not in an interview, you're going to psych yourself out. So I just kept calm. I didn't think about previous unsuccessful attempts, and I just went forward and did my best. Tom?
Oh yeah, thanks. For the sort of the politics and the philosophy questions in particular, should we try and avoid like giving unsolicited references to theorists that we might have read in the past, or is it okay to say based on this theory, or what do you think?
No, I think that question was asked already, which is, should I bring up relevant information to help support my points? You guys should use your common sense as to what is relevant. Something is relevant, I'm repeating myself, but something is relevant insofar as it helps you prove your point. And think about writing an essay, right? If I was writing an essay on, MacBooks and Apple, would I suddenly bring in Rousseau? Maybe not. So you really should just use your common sense. Like if you feel like this enhances your point, mention it. If you feel like it's irrelevant, don't mention it. I mean, I can't teach people common sense right now, right? I think everybody ought to use their best judgment. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Jan?
I realize this might be a bit unpredictable, but do you think applicants get asked about their TSA essays? And
no, I've never heard that before. I've never heard that before. I think that would be outrageous too. Yeah. Sahil?
Hi. Yeah. At the end of some interviews, do they ask you if you have any questions, and if they do, what's some of the standouts and what's impressive to say there?
Personally, I felt like at the end of every one of my interviews, the interviewers are trying to get off that call as soon as possible because they're short on time. So if you don't have a question, don't ask a question. You know what I mean? Like I don't know why people think they have to ask a question. Don't do that. Okay. Sometimes people ask like a specific question about the college. They say, oh, how's the weather, or how's the meals at the college? But if you wanted to ask those questions, I wouldn't ask a tutor that question, right? Just, it's okay. It actually specifically says on the Oxford website, it says it's okay not to have a question at the end. So please don't panic about coming up with a creative question to show how smart you are. That's really not necessary. Nakash, and then we'll take a question from Emma, and then what, guys, if Tia doesn't show up, if Professor Thornton doesn't show up for whatever reason, and again, this is my fault, so I apologize. if Professor Thornton doesn't show up, I can maybe do a mock interview live right here with someone who hasn't done it yet for PPE, and then we can talk through good and bad practices. Okay. So if that's okay with everybody. Right. Okay. Nikesh and then Emma.
So if an interviewer asks you something and it makes you kind of think of something else which you're quite confident on, you suggest maybe saying, this makes me think of this, but I'll answer the question first, and then maybe maybe if they want to ask you about it later on, you can go on to it.
Yeah, and they could, you know, that's what it means to talk out loud, to think out loud, right? Like if something else pops in your brain, you're like, oh, you know what? I just thought about this. Let me answer your question real quick, but you know, I was just thinking about this, and maybe we should discuss that, and let them guide it. If they want to guide that, they might come back to it later. You know, just feel the situation. Emma, and then we'll go on into whatever we need to do.
For the TSA, I know like a lot of people this year had some difficulties with like the computer. If Professor Thornton is able to join, would I be allowed to ask her like how applications with technical difficulties are being processed differently? Because I haven't been able to find anything about it online, and I'm just a bit worried that like my TSA score will be lower than everybody else getting interviewed, or would that be rude?
No. I think you can ask that question. I don't see a problem with that, but I think just keep in mind that are you saying if you had computer issues during the TSA or computer issues during the actual interview?
No, like during the TSA, like how are they going to process the application differently? Because obviously it's hard to scale results when some people had issues and some didn't.
I think they just omit the element of your TSA, you know, because I know somebody who didn't even take a TSA and still and is studying with me right now, because like I said, it is a holistic application. Everything is one single component, and missing a component is not necessarily going to kill your admissions prospect, and that is probably the best evidence of that, right?
Okay, so my interview is probably going to be like even more important than it would have been.
I personally can't say as to that. I think that's a question. I think that's a question for Tia if she does show up. I apologize, guys. I sent an email in the morning with an old link. I was meaning to send a new link, and she probably thinks I was sending her like a bum link. I don't have her phone number. Yikes. Okay. Are there any PPEs in this room that have not done a mock interview yet? Anybody? No? Okay. Let me, you know what? I think I might have Tia's number here. Let me. Are there any PPEs, or actually, to be honest, it wouldn't be a problem for an E&Mer to do a mock philosophy interview. We can do that together. Yeah. Who is T? Sorry, oh, it's Tao, right? Okay. Tao, did you have something to say? Your hand was raised.
Oh no, I don't. I was just saying I have.
That you have what? I'm sorry. I think you muted your.
Sorry, I was just saying I haven't been doing an interview yet.
Are you a PPEist?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so do you want to do a mock interview right now?
Now.
Well, yeah, now. As opposed to tomorrow afternoon. I mean, would you like to do one now?
Oh, sure. Can you hear me? Sorry, is there any problem with my microphone?
Maybe. I don't know. You keep muting, but I can hear you just fine now. Can everyone else hear Tao? Okay. Yeah. Do you want to do it right now?
Sure.
Okay. Let's jump into it then. And obviously, if anybody has places to be, feel free to get out of here. Accept my apologies. I really thought we could have had Professor Thornton here, but the questions, if she doesn't end up showing up eventually, if she doesn't show up eventually, I will still send your questions off and I can email everybody with her answers. The questions I'm going to ask Tao are from an actual previous philosophy interview at Oxford, and they're going to be nearly word for word. Okay, so let's jump into it. Okay, let's see. Small and small light. Okay, so can everyone see us? Okie dokie. Here we go. So hi Tao. What college are you applying for?
St. Catherine's.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm a philosophy fellow at St. Cat's, and I'll be doing your interview today. Can you first off tell me how you feel like philosophy fits into the overall degree of PPE, and what we might gain or lose by either having sort of more philosophy or less philosophy?
Thank you. I think really philosophy does a very important role in policymakers when they're trying to make economic policies, as it serves a way to justify a certain economic outcome. It's the role of politics to try to achieve the outcome, but I think philosophy is necessary for a certain policy to be justified morally. So, for example, when we are talking about we want to achieve a world that is more equal than the world we have right now, political philosophy such as, for example, the work by Rawls, John Rawls, it's something that could be used to justify such an outcome, because he said a society is only just when the any inequality existing in the society is benefiting the worst off in the society.
Right.
So I think that's a very important role of philosophy.
So it sounds like you think philosophy almost provides primarily provides a moral compass to help us make the political and economic decisions, and to provide sort of like a internal guidance. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what does it mean? You mentioned that it helps us know the moral way of doing things. What does it mean, in your opinion, for something to be moral?
Personally, I would say my view of something being moral means something that is beneficial to as many members of the society as possible.
Right. Okay. So I want to move on to our first question then, our first main question. Can you take a look at this object in my hand?
Yeah.
Okay. How many things are in my hand?
I think you're talking about if you define things as something, like if something only counts as if a holistic item counts as one, then the answer is one. But if you're thinking about you can break things down into micro or even to its kind of atomic sense, then it might be two, for example, the cap and the other part of the pen, or three, for example, including the very top of the pen, or just infinite or almost infinite if you break down to the atomic level. But yeah, it really depends on how you define or how you see something as an item.
So you mentioned holistic. What exactly do you mean by holistic? What does it mean for something to be holistic? Isn't sort of each pen component taken individually, whether it's the assembled pen or the cap or this or even a molecule of plastic, considered to be holistic?
I think this holistic could be defined in two ways. So firstly, you can consider it as physically connected. So for example, when the pen is when the cap is with the pen, the whole thing is physically connected, which makes it a holistic item. Or you can say holistic is when these different micro items combined together serve for a holistic purpose for the pen. So for example, you can say all the atoms, the molecules combining that the pen is comprised of is serving for the same purpose of writing, and therefore this makes it a holistic item.
Right. Okay, I see. So do you think I was asking you a trick question in this instance?
No. I think this is really the way people should be considering about the nature of how we see items. I don't see this as tricky.
What is a trick question? What does it mean for something to be a trick question?
Personally, I would interpret a trick question as something that the answer is not it's not obvious in a normal sense, or the question, the real answer demanded by the one asking it is way deeper than superficially what the question looks like.
Right, I see. I've been asking this question quite a lot recently, and obviously it's part of the interviews. And I keep getting different answers. People give me 1, 2, 3, maybe it's 10, maybe it's infinity, or maybe it's a bunch of molecules of plastic. And I'm trying to get less variance in the answers. How can I improve this question? Can you suggest me some ways in which you and I can work together in this, on how to better ask this question if we want to preserve the quantitative dimension, but at the same time get less variance in our answers?
What are you referring to when you're saying this question?
Sure, the original question of how many things am I holding in my hand? I'm just trying to perhaps make that question a little bit more clear, if you will, right? I'm trying to make sure that I'm not getting a variety of answers, but rather perhaps less variety in my answers.
Well, I think you can specify that the way you see an item, because well, if you're not my interviewer, or you're a normal person asking me, I would definitely say 1, because that's a more common sense approach. So if 1 is the answer you want, then you can state that you're thinking about in a more general way, or you can say the way you define an item. You can define any way, for example, a molecule, or as I said before, things connected together serve for a common purpose. But yeah, if you say that, it'll be easier for me to give you an answer that is direct, clear, and singular.
So you're suggesting that we should predefine the word thing before we ask the question?
Yes, and also you might be more specific. For example, when you're saying items, it might also be the air molecules in the air surrounding your hand. So I think there are many factors making giving a clear answer difficult, and by stating exactly what you want, or just more clear definitions, you can make it easier for others to come up with a simple answer.
What do you think? Let's zoom out to a more general and maybe abstract line of discussion. What do you think the implications of clarity, or otherwise, on the other hand, ambiguity, are to philosophy in general?
Just give me a few seconds thinking about it. I think the implication of clarity in philosophy mainly means something that is, if I give a description of something, for the person listening to it, it's immediately obvious that they can understand what it is. Where ambiguity means they might understand the ambiguity. In my view, is different from listening to it and have no idea what it is. But instead, is that after your conversation, you have a brief idea of a range of things, instead of a singular specific stuff. Yeah.
I think it also sort of verifies, if you will, or it confirms the importance of clarity in question asking for philosophy, right? That we should craft questions in ways that produce responses useful to us, right?
Yeah, agreed. Right. But oh, sorry, please go on.
We'll just move on to we're running short on time, so we're going to move on to the second part of the interview. And by the way, like apart from this mock interview, I'm just letting you know the interviewers will keep things moving. Okay, so don't expect sort of all day to answer the questions. Okay, can I just ask you to let me know what you think an argument is? And this is just to see what you think an argument is. Just let me know what you think it is.
I think an argument is a example or perhaps a reasoning that used to support a principle.
Okay, so for the purposes of this next exercise, we're going to define an argument as a set of premises and a conclusion. Is that fine? Okay, and we're only going to be concerned with valid arguments. We call an argument valid when it's not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time. Now that I've told you the definition, can you just repeat it back to me so I know you've heard it correctly?
Yeah, an argument is a set of premises and a conclusion. And as you said, the valid argument is when it's an argument when all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true.
The conclusion cannot be false is the formal definition, but yes, it must be true, right? Okay, so let me share my screen and we're going to go over some of these exercises. Let's see, here we go. Let's see. Give me 1 second. I have to reshare this. Let's see. Aha, here we go. Okay, share. Perfect. Okay, can you see my screen all right, Tao?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Okay, so for these arguments, I want you to take a look at them, read it. Obviously, feel free to read it out loud, and talk to me about what you think about the argument, and sort of let me know what you think about the structure. And the ultimate goal is for you to tell me whether or not you think it's valid or invalid. So can we go ahead and attempt the argument one?
Yeah, so in terms of the structure, I think the first premise gives two possibilities of what total is, and then on the second one, we kind of rejected one of the possibilities. So reach a conclusion that total is a cat, or total is one of the possibilities that's not be rejected. Right. I personally see this as a valid argument.
Okay, so just so that we get a little bit more clear, can you rephrase this as, let's set premise one as A or B. Can we just redo this, but using those letters?
Are you saying that I should be replacing or saying A or B instead of cat or dog?
Yeah, just so that we can pick up on the structure a little bit more. Sometimes when we use words,
sure,
it confuses us a little bit, right? So for Toto is a cat, we'll use A, and Toto is a dog, we'll use B. And for the opposite of those things, we'll use not A or not B.
Yeah. So premise one says Toto is A or B.
So actually, let's set Toto as a cat, the whole thing, because Toto doesn't change. Toto is a constant, right? So let's just change the entire argument, Toto is a cat, into A.
Okay. So A, Toto is a cat.
Sorry?
Sorry, are saying I should be referring to these lines? One line is A, one line is B, one line is C, or?
No. What I'm saying is that you are saying Toto is A or B. What I'm saying is that what premise one is saying is Toto is a cat or Toto is a dog, right? Who Toto is doesn't really matter in this case, right? It's the case of cat or dog. So I'm saying let's replace Toto is a cat with A and replace Toto is a dog with B, so that premise one is A or B.
Yeah.
Can you read me the rest of the argument? Yeah.
Oh, I see. Sure.
Yeah.
So premise one is saying that is A or B. Premise 2 would be not B, and the conclusion is A.
Yeah, that's fairly simple, isn't it? Okay, let's look at argument 2.
Yeah, so you can make premise 1 looks like A or B, A being Toto's a cat, B being my neighbor hates Toto. And premise 2 is A, and the conclusion is therefore not B.
So what do you think about this?
I think I think this is a valid argument.
And can you tell me why?
It's because P1 stated A or B, and P2 stated A, so therefore it has to be A.
Right. Therefore, it has to be B, right? I mean, therefore.
Yeah. Therefore, it's not B.
Right. Okay. So, what's interesting in English is that when we say the word "or," we mean something that's mutually exclusive in premise 1, right? We mean Toto's a cat, or my neighbor hates Toto. But it's like me saying I want fish or steak. It doesn't mean I want both, because I would have said fish and steak, right? In logic, the word "or" is not mutually exclusive. So in logic, Toto can be a cat and my neighbor can hate Toto at the same time. So knowing that possibility, did you want to change your answer at all?
Yes, I would say if we see this, the first premise especially, as a English sentence, then we should be interpreting it in a way we interpret English language. So therefore, they are, A and B are mutually exclusive. However, that means we have to find different ways to denote this in a philosophical.
In logic, even though in logic we're using the language English, what I'm saying is that when we write English in logic, the word "or" has a non-mutually exclusive meaning. So I don't think, let's not overthink what English is. It's just a matter of, I'm saying when we use "or" in premise 1 is saying that A can be true, B can be true, and A and B can be true together.
Oh yeah, okay, I see. So in this case, the argument becomes no longer valid, because if they can be true together, premise 2 that A is true, then B could also be true, and therefore the not B conclusion is false.
Right. Okay, good. So second to last one, argument 3, please.
Yeah. So premise 1 says if A, then B. If we take A as Christmas, B as December. Premise 2 says it's not A, then not A. And conclusion says not B. Well, personally, I see this argument as not valid, because B would happen if A is true, doesn't mean B wouldn't happen if A isn't true.
Right.
So in this context, it can be other days in December instead of the day the 25th.
Right, exactly, right. So that's fairly straightforward, and that just shows you what the if-then conditional means. If-then doesn't mean that if the if part is false, then necessarily the then part is false. That's not what if-then means. Okay, are you aware of the Spider-Man movies? Are you familiar with the Spider-Man movies?
I've heard of the names, but I can't really remember any character from it.
No problem.
Sorry.
So just to give you a little bit of, it's very light background. There's a guy in the movie called Peter Parker, and he sometimes turns into Spider-Man because he puts on a red costume and he's get all these superpowers and he manages to be Spider-Man. Okay, so that's sort of the premise of this movie. So can you read this argument? Let me know what you think.
Yeah. Joe thinks that Spider-Man is the bravest superhero in the world. Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Joe thinks Peter Parker is the bravest superhero in the world. Yeah, I think you can see this as.
So for this one, I want you to not use the A or B, because I think it could be a little bit confusing if we do it that way. Yeah. So just go ahead and think about it, maybe logically or common sense wise.
Yeah. So I think premise 2 essentially said that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are kind of interchangeable or swappable. Or they're identical. And in this case, as long as premise 1 is true, you can just substitute Peter Parker into Spider-Man, which makes the conclusion true.
I'm wondering, because you referenced sort of perfect substitution and identicalness, right? Can we say, is P2 valid? Let's not use the word valid. Does P2 make sense in the same way that, let's say, 10 divided by 5 is 2 makes sense to us?
Yes.
Right. So you think numbers are related sort of in a perfectness that is shared by humans and the characters that those humans play?
No, I think from your example given, what my understanding was, mathematically, if we're giving 2 expressions, as long as they reach the same value as a result, then they are interchangeable. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But what I'm saying is that, is there any tension, or are there any problems that arise when we compare sort of when we have premise 2 where we say Spider-Man is Peter Parker? Are there any tensions with that kind of statement? So in other words, does, logically speaking, like if we zoom out from this idea of perfect substitution, if Joe thinks that Spider-Man is the bravest hero, and then you claim that there's this identical sort of equivalence between Spider-Man and Peter Parker, then does Joe actually think that Peter Parker is the bravest superhero in the world?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, right?
In the sense that although they are identical, Joe might not see this name. So it's identical in a sense, but Joe might not perceive Peter Parker and Spider-Man as an identical person.
I think identicality must be sort of on every single possible level. Does that make sense? I think when most people, to be able to substitute so freely, Spider-Man must be perfectly identical to Peter Parker. And we're coming to the end of the interview here, just your closing thoughts on sort of P2. Do you think it's, going back to my question about the numbers, if I say 10 divided by 5 is 2, is that the exact same thing as comparing and equivalating Spider-Man to Peter Parker?
I think both has the same kind of, so I see. I think both has the same kind of, I wouldn't call it a flaw, but what I mean is this requires Joe, or the person listening to your mathematics expression, has some background knowledge of who Peter Parker is, or what does 10 divided by 2 means. Otherwise, they will perceive these things differently, which makes the exchange cannot happen.
Do you think that this argument is valid or invalid?
I think it's, I am actually, I cannot say certain, because I think if P2 is a universally known thing, then it's definitely valid. But in this case,
is P2 a universally known thing in the same way that 10 divided by 2 equals 5 is universally known?
I think 10 divided by 2 is 5. It's not universally known, just like this one. As if you ask someone before they go into primary school, they definitely don't know what it is. And that's essentially the same problem. I don't know who Peter Parker is before you've introduced him to me. Yeah, so I think they're not identical, or at least they're not equally universally known.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the end of our interview. We'll loop everybody else back in, I suppose. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay. So does anybody have some maybe feedback from the gallery first? What you felt like went well, and we'll do a sandwich. Someone say something that went well. Someone name something for improvement. Oh, come on now. I mean, nothing went well?
I think something that went really well was that he tried to, there were a lot of points where he was very unclear about something, and he was very open to admit that and to ask for that clarification when he needed it.
Yep, that's what I wrote down, and I definitely agree. Ask questions when needed, and that's very important. Yeah, something for improvement. Gabriel or Gabrielle?
I'd say maybe on the first point about the benefits of philosophy for the degree, kind of went almost off about philosophy in general and didn't necessarily bring it back to the degree.
I agree. I also think it just lost track of what the original question was that I asked. The original question I asked was, what might we gain and what might we lose, right? And I think not only was the discussion centered primarily on the gain side, the benefits of philosophy, but didn't really necessarily tie into the understanding of the degree. Most important, in my opinion, would have been contrasting the two things and showing that you were able to contrast what you felt the benefits were to the downsides. That's obviously an icebreaker question, but if you let that get off topic, and I felt like that went on maybe 30 to 40 seconds longer than the answer should have been, I think you should give the interviewer a chance to kind of step in a little bit. But yeah, that's good. I think another feedback on top of that is that use paper. You know, I mean, sometimes these questions are long. Use paper. Write down the questions. You know, don't. Why are you forcing yourself to memorize it? Write down the questions. That's how I was able to get these questions for you guys. Zach, a good thing, please.
So I quite like the way in which he took time to consider his thoughts, which is something I didn't do when posed with the same interview. So I sort of saw myself in that, and I think it certainly made him more well-resourced to answer the question.
Right.
And that's something I'm going to try keep in mind as well, for that matter.
Yeah, good. Any downsides anyone wants to say? Rooms for improvement? Nikesh?
Yeah, with the trick question, he didn't try to kind of address the ambiguity in terms of what trick question was in, jumped to saying
right.
It wasn't one.
That's right. He did quite well with defining thing, sort of, or at least attempting to define thing. I don't think well, it was one of the better definitions of thing that I've heard, which is that it has to be there has to be a holistic nature to it. That's interesting. But that might prompt more questions about what it means for something to be holistic, which is what I ended up having to ask, right? I said, what is something that's holistic? That's like using the word in the definition, right? So you have to kind of get deeper than that. But yeah, once I asked the trick question, unfortunately, we lost that depth of understanding, and that should be watched out for. That should be, everyone should be cautious about that. Right. Compliments. Any other good things, David?
I thought that he stayed on point for most of the interview. Like I didn't feel he was rambling or going off some tangent. He's always trying to address what you were saying.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just take the next room for improvement. I think the answers were of the right length, but unfortunately, I think he was a little bit too silent at times. I think you have to feel it, and you have to keep it conversational. I felt like we ran into a few points that were very awkward and made me forget what we were talking about a little bit, because it had either veered off topic or got a little bit too quiet, and we didn't have the conversational dynamic that I necessarily felt from other interviews. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, he got the questions. Question 3 came very intuitively for him. And you saw for question 3, I didn't have to prompt him for an explanation. For argument 2, I'm talking about the logic exercises. For exercise 2, where I explained the new information, which is the new teaching, right? I said the word or is not mutually exclusive in logic, and that's new information for him, and he had to correct his answer. I asked him, I said, do you think it's valid or not valid? He just told me valid or not valid without further explaining it. So I felt like that was a room for improvement. You definitely want to explain yourself and provide, even if it's a short explanation before you say yes or no, right after, you should briefly explain what you mean, because he did that for question 3. For question 3 about the Christmas question, he immediately said like, oh, this is not valid, then said because, and then let us know why, because there's other days in December that are not Christmas, because if not B, not necessarily not A, et cetera, right? All right, Dom, did you have a last comment about that?
Oh, sorry, I just had a quick question about that. Is that or part of logic? Is that universal? Like, is that with every logic question?
With every logic question, the word or means that it's not mutually exclusive. You know what? I'm just going to double check the logic Bible here and make sure that is correct, because I don't want to sound like an asshole. Let's see. Yes, you can see. Oh God.
Here we go. You can see there if P is true, or if Q is true, or if P and Q are true, then the conjunction P or Q is true. Right. So that is the definition of or in logic. Usually in logic, we were using the symbols, and it's sometimes more clear. If we literally meant exclusive or, the technical correct way to say it is either A or B. We put the word either, right? Either means not both. So yeah, but that's logic for you. You guys will have plenty of fun with logic. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And Tao, do you have any feedback?
Yes, I just want to ask, because essentially, if the question is right in mathematical or logical terms, then I understand what the or is referring to. But if the question comes in a sentence, or it looks like a sentence, should I interpret the or in a normal English way, or in a philosophical or logical way?
Well, I think you have to listen to what I was trying to tell you. I think at first you said you didn't say the right answer. You said, oh, well, because this is in English, we need to interpret it in strictly an English meaning. I think in English, the word or is not necessarily always mutually exclusive. Even strictly in English, I don't think it's that strict. It's not as strictly mutually exclusive in English as it is not mutually exclusive in logical English. You know what I mean? So yeah, I was just trying to guide you in the right direction. And also, I think you and I had an interesting discussion about the Spider-Man question at the end. What I was getting at, and this is my personal view, I think you had an interesting discussion about it, but my perspective was that it's not the same to compare sort of two sentient beings, right, as it is to compare numerical concepts, which never change, which always have the exact same qualities, and which can be defined in mathematics a priori. That means without any empirical knowledge, as being equivalent to each other. Whereas Spider-Man, just like you said, Joe would have to have known that equivalence existed in order for the conclusion to hold true. So that was my opinion about it. I was just trying to get more discussion out of that. But yeah, I think you did quite well overall. A little bit more confidence. You're getting the right answers. Speak up a little bit, and yeah, just like I said, there's no way to prepare for an interview other than reading your personal statement. Yeah, so good for everybody. I think we'll call this a workshop. I'm again apologetic about the Thornton situation. She still hasn't replied to my email. I've had my email on my computer here up the whole time. Does anybody have any last questions about Oxford in general, or admissions, UCAS, things like that? Leona?
Can we get a PowerPoint for today's workshop?
I will just post this recording online.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Gabriel?
I was just interested in like the question about the implications of ambiguity in philosophy. What in your experience, what was generally a good answer for that?
So, well, I just think like sometimes you'll get so deep into it, but then you need to zoom out a little bit more. And I think that applied to both of the sort of general questions I asked, right? So we were having this discussion about thing, about definition of thing and trick question, blah, blah, blah. But then we had to zoom out to an upper level. And then we were having a discussion about logic and, you know, strictly letters A and B. And then we had to sort of zoom out to a more abstract discussion on what it means for A to be B, right? So there was this contrast between the two things. I think answering your question, it's some of the interesting answers I got were related to how, for example, if I wanted the answer to be 1, I would surely ask it in a way that would prompt the answer to be 1. If I wanted it to be 2, I might say like, how many distinct objects do you see here? Or how many objects can this be easily disassembled with minimal effort, or some kind of, you know, some kind of qualification like that. But then I think some of the applicants who were able to think deeper, they thought about, well, is that begging the question, right? Like, is there a problem with crafting our questions in such a specific way that we're only getting the answers we want? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of question asking? And then, you know, you can go on and on about that. But yeah, so that's sort of the feedback about that. Any other final thoughts? We're coming up on 2 hours now, so I think we're going to call it a night. Congratulations again to you guys. Obviously, you know, just do your best. You know, and I think the hardest part is actually the part after your interviews, because you have to go through the entire month of December. You have to go past New Year's, past Christmas, past New Year's, and then you're going to get your TSA scores before you get your offer letters. So that's going to psych you out even more. Yeah, it's going to be stressful. And yeah, for those of you successful, remember, if you don't have an unconditional offer, you have to wait until August, right? If you're in the UK, to get your grades. So there's still a lot more coming. We're still at the early steps. So I want everybody to keep positive, stay confident. You guys got this. And I believe in you. I believe in you. Everybody here is here for a reason. Last thoughts, anybody? No? No one? Diana, your microphone's not working. Diana's microphone's not working. Jan, last thoughts. Leona, anybody? No?
I just want to say thank you, Yo-Yo, for all the workshops.
No problem. Yeah, very happy to. And
thank you so much.
No worries. We've got like a lot of views, and I'm glad a lot of people were helped out. Yeah. And actually, speaking on that, we you know, of the applicants who participated in the workshop, a vast majority of people got invitations to interview. So I think definitely you could say that those workshops had an effect. Yeah, I mean, not strictly speaking scientifically, because we could say that the people who participated in the workshop were smarter to begin with because they took initiative. Who knows? That's just, yeah. Kayla, last thoughts?
I actually had a really quick question specifically about American qualifications, and I know that you talked about already. So I already have the qualifications, the 4 AP scores out of 5.
Yeah.
Would I be expected to exceed that because I'm taking more exams this year, or will that be good enough if I do get an offer?
No, I think Oxford, for the most part, establishes minimum criteria that must be met. And then once you receive your offer, on your offer, it will say something like, you must demonstrate that you've met the minimum offer as part of our offer. So you must demonstrate.
Like sending it from the College Board?
Yeah, College Board score reports, right? So that's more or less what it is. Anything on top of the minimum requirements is a bonus. So showing that you've taken extra APs or whatever, that's all bonus on top of that.
Okay, but it's not likely that
Sorry.
I'm happy to stay behind after let everyone else go to answer more personal questions, like sort of individual circumstance questions. Anyone else have any last thoughts? No.
What I wanted to say before my computer started malfunctioning was, I guess, just good luck to us all, and hopefully see you next year.
Yes. I hope everyone's on the student room. That's a good place for everyone to stay involved. And hopefully, for now, I'll ask everybody if they want to disclose their information. A lot of you guys in this call are interviewing at the same college. I see a few people here who I know are interviewing same subject, same college. So maybe I'll introduce you guys and you guys can get to know each other. Unfortunately, this was something that was possible in the past. In the past, interviewees met each other across multiple subjects. They knew each other before the term started. You know, it's fun like that, but you guys just simply don't get the privilege. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and good luck to everybody.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Power through.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Work hard, everybody. Work hard. You're almost there.
Thank you.
All right.
Good luck to us.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. See you guys.
I'll have gone your workshop. Thank you so much.
No problem, Leona. Good to see you again.
Have a good night.
Good night. See you later.